Hello and welcome to another album analysis. In today's video we're looking at the newly released 8th studio album from the American indie rock band We Are Scientists titled Lobes. The band have certainly come a long way since their inception all the way back in the mid-2000s with their album With Love and Squalor. Since then they've really kind of ebbed and flowed in their popularity. They've never been the big band at the height of fame, then they've never been the sort of band that has really just faded away. They've really had these peaks and troughs, and this new album they're looking to continue building on the success they did see with their previous album Huffy, which they did release at the end of 2021. The previous album did take on a much more upbeat, very guitar driven style, and although we're going to be seeing some elements slightly crossover, this album is definitely going to be taking on some much more dark undertones but keeping it very light, very synth driven as well, as opposed to the previous album. And one funny little thing about this album is actually that the name of the album did come from a form of cereal, although the actual album itself is going to have nothing to do with breakfast. So will this album have a soothing effect on your lobes or just leave you with tinnitus? Let's take a look at it track by track. Opening the album we do have Operator Error. Now this is a song that really does bridge the gap between their previous album Huffy and Lobes. It does have this mesh of guitar and electronic sounds, and they're just kind of making that transition which we are going to see between the two albums. And it's a track all kind of about false pretenses. We're going to be seeing a lot of messaging in this actual album, and one other thing to note about this track is actually that Keith Murray he's a bit of an emotional planner of disasters, so he almost sees things coming and he kind of plans for them, so it's a very personal album to him, and we're seeing that already with the lyrics in I could foresee it from a mile away, this whole oncoming disaster. So he's planning ahead, he knew things were going to happen, and you can foresee sometimes maybe with a breakup or something like that, so very accessible to a lot of people that have been in that situation. So you can take different messages away from it because there's always kind of a disaster or a mistake in life that you often see coming before it actually does happen. We've also got a couple of other really interesting things going on with this track. It is very bass driven, and we have got this really weird metal style guitar solo that's thrown in towards the end of the track. But outside of those elements, it is a very catchy synth-laden bop. It really is. It's very catchy, certainly a great introduction to this album. Then we do move into Dispense with Sentiment at track number 2, a song all about being more proactive. And Keith Murray, again, he's somebody who is very reserved, despite the fact that he comes across very prominently on stage and in his music as a person away from the world of music. He is very reserved, and that's what the song is definitely trying to push that idea out. We have got some really cool elements in the form of a very trickled synth. We've got the record scratch sample thrown in at times as well, but it does have a much more soft and relaxed flow compared to the opening of the album. And we see also the chorus being really dragged out, really holding those notes, and we also have a pick guitar as well, so there's lots being thrown in, but it doesn't really sound like anything. They all seem to fit together very well. It's very rare moments in this track where just maybe one or two notes just don't feel like they quite belong, but outside of that, definitely quite a strong track, really showing a bit of pace change already between what we're seeing on the album already. Then in at track 3 we do have Human Resources, which I'm very surprised was not released as a single from this album. It certainly is a very strong track. We do have a very fast paced drum beat on this. We also have this really cool reverberating synth sound that almost rises and falls, almost a bit like a rainmaker being turned upside down again and again and again. And the song almost kind of escalates just like it does with the sound in terms of the lyrics as well. Almost like this idea of you're just building towards something and then there's this explosion of either emotion, or you run out of something, you explode, you get angry, and then you have that soothing kind of effect afterwards. So really great how they've done that and used the music to help drive that in. And it is a very drum driven track as well. We're really seeing already different instruments coming to the forefront of every track, which I really like. I like bands that are able to do that and really show a lot of versatility in their instrumentation on an album. Then we do move into Lucky Just to Be Here, a track all about being optimistic, remaining optimistic no matter the situation. The song lyrics do also give off this idea of maybe the ending of a relationship. You could apply the optimism to anything though, anything you approach in life, and if you are someone who is optimistic, you will really resonate with this song. It does have a very nice slow soft build, very full of ambience. It really is. It just has this great sound just encompassing the entire track. And we do some really interesting things, so like some slightly sunken vocals. It's something bands like The Killers do quite often on many of their tracks, and it has this really nice great build, and it's very akin to Coldplay's Fix You. When that song has the guitar coming in, there's this big explosion of sound, and even with the drum pattern and the styling at the point where this explosion comes in, you can see the similarities between the two. So I think it's really great they've done that, and even just to say, using the drums, making it sound very similar, I think they must have taken some form of inspiration from that track for this, because the two do have this very similar styling, but it is just great to see this slow build into this really big sound, and then it tapers off really nicely at the end of the track. Next up we do have Turn It Up, which is definitely the wackiest track on this album. It's like they've just turned everything to 11 and gone, you know what, let's just release a track that is just completely packed full of just craziness, almost pure maximal extravagance. It's got this really interesting club beat mixed with a very funky bass, very reminiscent of bands such as Chic, Kool and the Gang and a variety of others, but we have got some really great layering. As I say, everything in this track is massively over the top, and for some reason you can tell they're having fun doing it. It's almost like they said, we've got to put one song on this album that just goes over the top, and you can tell with the music it really does aim to do that. We've also got some use of retro sounds, and it really leaves some interesting gaps between the lyrics that just allow the instruments to be much more prominent. They're not hidden behind the lyrics, because Keith Murray has a very recognisable voice, and he really does kind of climb above a lot of the music with his vocal style. So it's great to see that they just kind of put these longer gaps in before the next lyric, let the musicianship really come through and just have its moment to shine. Then we do head into Settled Accounts, which has a couple of really interesting things going on. We've got this disco inspired guitar, effectively really interesting to see how they've thrown that in there. Also New Order style synths. This is a track that seems to be stuck somewhere between the late 70s, early 80s with its inspiration, and it brings up almost like the bringing up the past, I think, is the main message in this. The idea of settled accounts, keep bringing them up. You settle something, you generate an answer, but it keeps getting brought up. And it does feel like that's where the song is going, this idea of towards the end of a relationship. And although we have got a lot of lyrics that are understood in these songs, there is also a lot of openness to them. The idea that I think a lot of them are very personal to Keith Murray, but he's made it so that you can apply them to different situations depending on your way of looking at the album. Although it has this very feel-good atmosphere to it, some of the lyrics can often be quite dark, about being reserved, about relationship struggles, relationship angst, which they do cover in a lot of their music. Then we do move into Here Goes. Now this is a much darker track with bassier tones and a very distorted, etchy key solo that's really thrown in there as well. It's probably the darkest track on this album, and it's all about the moment before taking action. It's a really cool way that they've built this song up, because it's almost like a story. It's almost this you're leading up to this moment just before you take action. It's kind of leaving you on a bit of a cliffhanger with this track, because it's that idea. I'm sure everyone's been in those situations where they're a bit awkward and they know that they've got to do this task and they kind of have to build themselves up to it, and it's telling that story. It makes it really, really accessible and really understandable for the listener, because most people have been in that situation. And I do like that you kind of get this resolution at the end of the track. It's really great to see that it just leads you up to that point, that kind of last moment where you kind of take a breath and you just make a jump. Maybe it's, I don't know, asking somebody out or something like that, or taking a driving test. Just these moments in life where you've got to stop, pause before you then take action. Then we do dive into Parachute, which has got this very guitar driven swing to the track, and it almost conveys this message of it's not you, it's me. Again, very personal to Keith Murray, it feels like, with this particular track. It feels like he's often the person that's really kind of in a not the best mental space, or always kind of just got somebody that's kind of hanging on for him. So definitely kind of conveys that through a lot of the lyrics, and I think he actually touched on that in an interview as well. And I like some of the lyrics as well, the idea of dive right in a parachute. They've got this very stretched guitar note as well that almost resonates, this idea of swooping or diving down. So I like a couple of the instrumental ideas that they've thrown into this. I didn't feel it was probably the strongest track on the album. It was on the slightly weaker side from the songs we've heard so far. Given all the synthiness that we have had on this album, it just unfortunately doesn't live up to the levels that we've seen, or certainly the concisiveness of the other tracks on the album. Heading towards the end of the album, we've got what I would consider probably one of my personal favourites, in the form of Less From You. It has this super funky guitar with these very, very bouncy drums. It's very 80s, lots of soaring notes, and it's a song all about people who go above and beyond expectations. It's this just really simple song of I expecting nothing less from you, and you know that your friends are going to go above and beyond to do the best they can. It just exudes positivity and just knowing that your friends are going to be there for you. It's got a great synth solo, amazing layering, and it is a little bit simple at times. It is a very super simple chorus, but it really does just make it so infectious. And one thing that really does help with this simple chorus that the band have got, whereas I'm normally not keen on them, the instrumentation in this song and the layering is fantastic over the chorus. It really adds this disco dancey element to the track that really just helps the chorus from being boring. It really stops you noticing noticing the repetitiveness of that chorus, because you've got this overloaded kind of positivity coming from the instruments, and it really just does shine as a track, and it certainly is very, very well put together. Then rounding out the album, we do have Miracle of 22. Now this has got a very late 80s styling with its much quicker guitar, and one interesting thing this track does is it changes key every time it gets to the chorus. At first I thought I was just hearing things, but it really actually does just move with between every single verse. You'll notice that it's in a different key. It's certainly a very interesting thing that they've done with this track. I'm not overly keen on the vocal harmonizer effect they've got going on. It does make it sound a little bit strange at times, and it does resonate this idea of if it's been a tough year. Talking about if I make it out alive, it'll be a miracle of 22. So it makes you feel like it's a very difficult thing. Or maybe it is, again, more Keith Murray kind of talking towards that ability to try and really kind of be less reserved and really just take a challenge and really take a leap of faith. So, but again, you can apply this track and most of this album how you want to, depending on the kind of way that you want to look at it. So overall, this is a very weird, wacky and wonderful album. It's certainly great to see that although it's got those slightly darker undertones, these synth-laden styles they throw on it do make it a very upbeat. It is very much a feel-good anthem despite some of the negativity around the meanings of the songs and the lyrics. A couple of things are a little bit over the top or don't overly mesh the best way they can. Probably turn it up as well. I know that the idea of that track is to really just push everything overboard, and it's a little bit of fun, but at the same time you can just really tell they've gone for that styling. Also a couple of the elements that were a little bit strange. The metal guitar solo that we had in Operator Error was just a little bit wacky and weird, and at times just felt like a little bit strange, but it certainly gave us a good introduction to the album. But in terms of the positives, I think some of the songwriting is really, really strong. They have got on this very simple messages, very easy to understand, and there is a lot of times where the music just fits so well together. They've got so many elements going on, so many things that they've thrown in, and they've got flutes, guitars, keyboards. They will just throw any instrument in, and they have really pulled it together very well. I would like to see them stick with more of this style and this sound going forward on future albums. I think the synth style really does suit them, and it's going to be very, very popular. As for a rating, I'm definitely going to have to go with an 8 out of 10. I am tempted to sway more towards 8.5, but there are a couple of elements, as I said, that are a little bit too wacky, but I think the band have really found their footing. I would argue this is probably one of the strongest albums the band have put out in their 8, and I would love to see them continue with this synth-driven sound that is really just blending in different ideas with guitars, bass, letting different instruments take the forefront. It really does work for them. So that will be everything for today's video, but please do check this album out. It is definitely worth listening. If you need a feel-good album to listen to or just something to get those energy levels up, this is a great album to help you do just that. Give it a listen. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what your favourite track is, or if you don't like the album as a whole, let me know why. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to see more content like this, then please do feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next album analysis.